This just into CNN. Twitter has now restricted the Twitter account of Donald Trump Jr., the president's son, after he shared video of medical doctors spreading misinformation about the coronavirus. We should note that the president himself RT'd, shared many of the same videos.
Twitter is now responding to reports that they suspended the account of the president's oldest son, Donald Trump Jr. The social media company saying, quote, "This account has not been permanently suspended. Per the screenshot, the tweet requires deletion because it violates our rules, sharing misinformation on COVID-19. And the account will have limited functionality for 12 hours. Last night, the first son posted the same controversial video shared by his father that promoted hydroxychloroquine and said people don't need to wear masks.
This is a president who started out as a candidate who did well stoking culture wars. And this is another version of a culture war in President Trump's mind.
Now, I think a lot of people might be surprised by my take on this. I hate this. The censoring of far-right crazy loons spreading misinformation in the way that Donald Trump Jr. has, who have a platform, and Trump himself, when they have censored him now, Twitter, it's not going to end well. We should not be asking these tech companies that have enormous power to be making rules about who should be censored, what should and should not be censored, based on arbitrary standards. And eventually, it's going to bite the left. And that's because the left is traditionally going after power, and sometimes people say, oh, that's not true, what the left is advocating for. Oh, that's a conspiracy theory, say, with the Iraq War, or say something even more benign, like how many lives Medicare for All saves. I doubt Twitter would censor someone for that kind of statement, but that's the precedent it sets. Say activists, Code Pink, people who are making disruptive political statements at protests. Black Lives Matter a few years ago, before the group became way more popular. It had a very severe net disapproval rating just a few years ago. And there's always going to be that push from the right to apply a standard that same standard to the left, because a standard was applied to them. Now, the left is almost always way more correct than the right. Not in every instance, but in most instances, I believe. But that doesn't matter, because what forums like Twitter and other internet companies are supposed to be is open season and free speech heaven, where people can say whatever they want. And I think it's also counterproductive, because all it does really is preach to the pro-Trump or the anti-Trump choir, and then all the pro-Trump people will leave the platform, and then it feeds into their victim complex. Oh, look, the leftist mob is trying to censor us. And that can have legs, because people like Trump and his son are being censored on platforms like Twitter. So my point also is that if you want to find out what Trump Jr. said, just look up an article. Like, you can't filter that information from getting out there in general, because the Washington Post is going to write an article about when Twitter temporarily censored the Trump son, and the information's there. I mean, so this is what was said. This is what Trump Jr. tweeted out and why his account was restricted. The video in question featured Dr. Stella Emanuel, a physician from Houston, Texas, speaking on the steps of the U.S. Capitol in Washington, surrounded by members of a right-wing doctors group. Emanuel made baseless claims about coronavirus, including hailing hydroxychloroquine as a cure, even though the anti-malaria drug, which has been repeatedly touted by the president, has not been found to be an effective treatment. The Houston doctor has also dismissed mounting evidence that face masks substantially help limit the spread of coronavirus. According to the Daily Beast, Emanuel is a pediatrician and religious minister who has made other outlandish claims, including that some gynecological problems are caused by dreams of having sex with witches or demons. She has also said that the U.S. government is run in part by reptilians and aliens, that alien DNA is used in medicines, and that scientists want to vaccinate people against being religious. Principles are tested not by easy cases, and this is a very difficult one to say, oh, I'm on the side of Trump Jr. tweeting out this horrific stuff and idiotic stuff. Obviously, I don't agree with it. I 100% disagree with it and think it's dangerous and insane. But I think the alternative is more dangerous, because then they're just going to go to other platforms to put this stuff out there. And then media companies will report on it. Like, what is the next step in logic here? It's just emotional reactions. All of these MAGA heads are going to get this information, misinformation, lies, propaganda, wherever they want to get it. So why are these tech companies now being given leeway to eventually do this? Eventually. It'll happen. It'll happen. What about like pro-Palestinian groups? I'm just trying to riff and think about some places that, or some leftist spaces that might be subject to this. I just don't agree. I don't think this is the right way to go. And I think it's immensely counterproductive and short-sighted, even though I understand the good intention behind it.